A ruck is an honest thing. It weighs what it weighs. You can lie to almost everyone about almost everything, but you cannot lie to a loaded pack on your back at the end of a long lane. It tells you the truth about your legs and your lungs and the exact size of the thing you are willing to carry. And it tells that truth quietly, without an audience, one step at a time. I have carried heavier things than a ruck. I want to say that plainly at the start, because the rest of this only makes sense if you know it going in. On the morning, a Marine corporal kicked my pack into the gravel and told a laughing line of troops that I could not even lift it. I had already, once in my life, carried 2 grown men off a ridge, one at a time, across 600 meters of open ground, while people I could not see did their level best to make sure I never reached the other side. But that morning, none of them knew that. That morning, I was a small woman in a gray shirt at the back of a line, and I looked like nothing at all, and that was fine with me. It was, if anything, the point. Let me tell you both days at once, because in my head, they have never really been separate. There is the lane in the gray light in the country I grew up in, and there is the ridge, 13 years back, in a country I will never forget the smell of. I have spent a long time learning that the second one is the ground under the first, and that I cannot explain the corporal without the ridge, or the ridge without the corporal. So I am going to walk you up both of them together and let them meet where they met for me. I got to the course early. I am always early. It is not discipline so much as an old habit built out of a fear I never fully argued myself out of. The fear of walking up to a thing that has already started without me. That morning I had a formation to take over in 2 days, a combined pre-deployment group I had never met, and I had come to see them first the honest way, before anyone put on a face for the new operations officer. So I parked away from the lot, and I walked in on foot, and I wore a plain gray physical training shirt with no rank and no name and boots that had outlived 2 enlistments, and I carried a loaded pack, because if you are going to watch a ruck lane, you might as well be on it. There is a version of me that would have driven up in a marked vehicle, worn the oak leaves, and let the lane snap tight around my arrival. I have never trusted what that version sees. A unit shows a stranger the truth of itself, the version it keeps when it thinks no one who matters is watching. I wanted the truth, so I made myself a stranger. The lane ran long and flat between 2 tree lines, churned to pale dust by 1,000 boots before mine. A mixed formation worked it in relays, Army and Marine, and a scatter of others, packs bouncing, cadre voices carrying in the cold air, the way voices only carry at dawn. I found the tail of the line, and I got in it, and I set my pack on a low bench to cinch a strap, and I looked at the course the way you look at weather, reading it, feeling out where it would be kind and where it would be cruel. That was when the corporal found me. His name was Kessler. I did not know that yet. What I knew was a young Marine, maybe 22, built like a door, working the front of the lane with the specific, loud confidence of a man who has just enough authority to enjoy it and not yet enough time in to be humble about it. He had been running his relays hard and clean, and he had a crowd, and a crowd is a dangerous thing to give a 22-year-old. He clocked me at the back of the line, and something in him decided, in the half-second it takes to decide these things, that I did not belong there. I was small, I was gray and unmarked. I had a cap pulled low and sunglasses hanging off my collar and a face that gives away nothing. And in the arithmetic he ran without knowing he was running it, I came out as a problem. A wife who had wandered too close, a public affairs escort, a civilian who thought a ruck was a photo opportunity. He walked the whole length of the lane to get to me. That is the thing I noticed even then, in the cold, before any of the rest of it. He did not correct me from where he stood. He came all the way down to make it a show. "This is a working lane," he said, loud enough for the front. "It's not a photo op." I looked at him and said nothing. I have found that nothing is usually the correct amount to say to a man who is performing. He did not like the nothing. Men like Kessler that morning never do. Silence to them reads as either fear or stupidity, and both invite more. "You can't even lift a ruck," he said, and he put his boot against my pack where it sat on the bench and shoved, and it went off the edge and hit the gravel with the flat, heavy sound a loaded pack makes. A sound like a body sitting down hard. "Quit wasting our time." The line laughed. Not all of them. That is a thing worth saying, because in the tellings of these stories, everyone always laughs, and it is never everyone. Some of them laughed because he was their cadre, and you laugh at what your cadre does. Some laughed because it was cold and cruel and easy and the target was small, and some of them did not laugh at all and looked at the dust, and I marked those faces without meaning to, the way you do. I bent down, I picked up the pack, I I checked the strap I had come there to check, and I set it back on my shoulders, and I stood up straight. And I still did not say anything. I want to be clear that this was not restraint in the noble sense. I was not holding back a great and righteous speech. I simply had nothing to prove to Corporal Kessler, and I had learned a long time ago, on ground much worse than that lane, that the sentence you do not say lands harder later than any sentence you say now. I had 600 kinds of proof of who I was, filed and verified and pinned to a chest I was not wearing that day. I did not require the 31st witness on that lane to see me correctly, needing to be seen correctly. Right that second, by a stranger who owes you nothing, is a hunger I burned out of myself years ago, in a place where being seen correctly would not have saved anybody. So I settled the straps and I squared to the lane and I let him walk back to the front satisfied. Far down the fence line, where the Navy men stood a little apart from the crowd, one of them had gone very still. I did not see it yet, but it had already started. Here is the ridge, 2013. I was 25, a sergeant, and I was the only woman attached to a naval special warfare troop in a hard corner of a hard country, and for the first 3 weeks I had been an add-on, a checked box, a requirement someone at a higher headquarters had written into an order that these men had not asked for and did not want. That is not a complaint. It is just the shape of the thing. I had come up through a program that put women alongside special operations units to do work those units could not do without us. The work of talking to the women and children of a village, of being a face that did not read as a threat in a doorway, where every man read as a threat. Cultural support, they called it. On paper, it was liaison. In practice, it was everything, because information does not care what your job title is. And some of the most important information in that whole valley lived in rooms that men in that troop were never going to be allowed to enter. For the first 3 weeks, that changed nothing about how the troop saw me. I ate at the end of the table. I got the jobs no one wanted. I was, in the exact and literal sense, the last person consulted about anything, and I did not fight it, because fighting it would have proved their point about me. And because I had learned that the fastest way to earn a hard room is to be quietly, undeniably useful, and let the room catch up on its own. The room caught up in the 3rd week, in a village at the mouth of the valley. The troop had gone in looking for a man, and the man was not there, and the compound was full of women and children who read every one of those large armed men as exactly the threat they were. And the whole thing was seizing up, going nowhere, the kind of stall that turns dangerous if it sits too long. Pruitt was running it, and Pruitt was good, but Pruitt could not walk into the room where the women were, and the women were where the truth lived, so they sent in the tool they had not decided they needed. I sat down on the floor of that room with the women, and I took off my helmet, which every manual says you do not do, and which was the entire point. And I spent 40 minutes drinking tea I did not want and talking about nothing that mattered until, slowly, a grandmother decided I was a person and not a rifle. And the grandmother told me in the roundabout way that truth arrives in a room like that, where the man we were looking for actually was, and that there was a second thing under the floor of the next building that the troop was about to walk over, and that I should tell my men to be careful of the far wall. I told Pruitt to be careful of the far wall. He was careful of the far wall. What was behind it was the kind of thing that would have taken his legs, and he knew it. And he looked at me afterward with a completely different face than the one he had been wearing for 3 weeks. That was the day I stopped being a checked box to that troop. Not because I did anything brave, because I did the one thing none of them could do, and it kept them alive. And there is no faster path into the trust of hard men than keeping them alive in a way they could not have kept themselves. After the village, Pruitt saved me a seat. After the village, Mabry started telling me things. After the village, when Trell called me sergeant like it was a whole name, the rest of them heard it as his due and not his naivety. 3 weeks to earn it. It is always 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, the earning, and it is always slower than it should be. And I have never once resented the slowness, because the trust that comes fast comes cheap, and the trust that comes slow is the kind that carries you off a ridge. The troop did not know all of that yet, back at the start. They knew I was small and new and not one of them, and they were polite the way professionals are polite to a tool they have not decided they need. All except Trell. Micah Trell was the youngest of them, 21, and he had not yet learned to be careful with people, which is a thing that would have gotten beaten out of him in another year and never got the chance. He called me sergeant like it was a whole name. He asked me questions the others were too proud to ask. And on the morning we went up Bridge 6, he fell into step beside me on the climb and said, grinning, "You actually coming up with us, Sergeant?" I told him I went where the mission went. He grinned like it was the best thing he had heard all week. Copy that, he said. You go where the mission goes. I have thought about that exchange more times than I can count. It was nothing. It was two soldiers on a hill making the small talk that fills the space before the work. But it is the last ordinary thing I have of him. And the mind does something cruel and holy with the last ordinary thing. It keeps it. It keeps it perfectly, the grin and the dust on his cheek and the way he said copy that. And it will not let it fade the way it lets the important things fade. Pruitt was ahead of us on the climb, the team's easy center of gravity, cracking quiet jokes over his shoulder. Mabry was quieter, a step behind Pruitt, the kind of man who says one thing an hour, and it is always the thing that matters. The ridge went up in front of us the color of old bread, and the heat sat on the whole valley like a hand, and the radio traffic murmured in my ear, and it was, right up until it was not, the most ordinary kind of terrible day. Then the wash below us opened up from three sides, and the ordinary afternoon ended between one breath and the next. Back on the lane, in the gray cold, Master Sergeant Delmore found me. He was the senior cadre NCO for the course, a big, weathered soldier with 20-some years in his face, and he had been handed a roster that morning with a name on it he was expecting to meet in 2 days at a conference table. Not on his ruck lane, in a gray shirt. He came down the line the way Kessler had, but everything about the way he moved was different. And when he got close, his eyes went to the pack on my shoulders and then to my face, and I watched him understand. He started to straighten. I stopped him with a look. Just a look. It is a thing you learn to do without a word, and he had been in long enough to read it, and he stood down out of the salute that had been forming in his spine and let his face go neutral. "Ma'am," he said, very low, so low it did not carry 2 feet. "You don't have to take his lane." "I take every lane, Master Sergeant," I said just as low. "That's the job." He held my eyes for a second. There was a whole argument in that second, the argument of a good NCO who has just watched one of his corporals kick a major's pack into the dirt and knows exactly how that ledger is supposed to settle. He wanted to settle it. I could see him wanting to. "He's a good Marine most days," Delmore said. It was not an excuse. It was information, offered honestly. The way a good senior NCO offers you the thing you will need in a minute to make the right call. Loud. Young. But he's not cruel underneath it. I've watched him carry 2 different privates through this course who wanted to quit. "I believe you," I said, and I did. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Let the morning be what it is. I'll take the lane." He did not like it. But he was a professional, and professionals do the thing they do not like when the person who outranks them has thought it through, and he could see that I had. He gave me one short nod and stepped back and let me be a stranger again. I have thought about why I did that. Why I did not simply say my last name and my rank and end it there in the cold. Why I made a whole morning out of it. Part of it was the thing I told you, that the unsaid sentence lands harder. But part of it was smaller and more human than that. I wanted to see the group true. And you cannot see a group true if you announce yourself, because the instant they know a major is on the lane changes, everyone stands a little straighter and performs a little harder, and the truth goes back into hiding. I had 2 days before 600 people became my responsibility. I wanted one honest morning first, so I kept my rank in my pocket and my history further down than that, and I got back in the line. The group I was about to inherit was a hard one. Not hard in the way people mean when they say a unit is squared away. Hard in the way a knot is hard, a thing that has been pulled tight in too many directions for too long and needs someone patient to work it loose without cutting anything. It was a combined pre-deployment group, Army and Marine, and a handful of others, thrown together for a mission that needed all of them and had not been given the time to teach them to trust each other. 3 months from now, they would be somewhere difficult, depending on people they barely knew, and the thing that would keep them alive was not the fuel or the ammunition or the plans I was so good at making. It was whether they had decided, down in the place where soldiers actually decide these things, that the person next to them was worth crossing open ground for. You do not build that from a conference room. You do not build it with a briefing. You build it the slow way, by being the kind of leader who makes it safe to be the small, quiet person at the back of the line, because a unit that eats its own quiet people at the back is a unit that will leave someone on the ground when it counts. I had learned that on a ridge. I was not going to unlearn it in a conference room. That is the real reason I came in on foot, in a gray shirt, and let a corporal decide I was nobody. I did not come to catch Kessler. I came to find out what this group did to its nobodies, because how a unit treats the person it has decided does not matter is the single truest thing you can learn about it. And it is the one thing it will never show you if it knows you are watching. Kessler showed me. He did not mean to. He showed me the sickness, and without knowing it, he gave me the first chance to start treating it. I have never told him that. He thinks he simply got caught being cruel to the wrong stranger. In a way, he is right. But he was also the first honest data I got about a group I was about to be responsible for. And everything I did on that lane after his boot hit my pack, I did as much for the 600 people behind him as I did for the woman he had just insulted. There was a young soldier near me at the back, a private first class, small like me, gassed at the specific edge, where a person decides whether they are the kind who quits or the kind who does not. Her name tape said Nolan. She had been watching the whole thing with Kessler, watching me pick the pack up out of the gravel and say nothing, and I could see her doing math with it, though she did not know what the numbers meant. "First Ruck course?" I asked her. She nodded, breathing hard, not trusting her voice. "You're still standing," I said. "That's the whole test right now, not the pace. Just whether you're still standing when they call the next relay. Stay standing. The pace comes later." She looked at me the way you look at someone who has said a true thing at the exact moment you needed a true thing, and she squared up, and she stayed standing. It cost me nothing. It is the cheapest thing in the world to give, and I have never understood why people hoard it. Down at the wire, the two Navy men had stopped talking entirely. One of them, the bigger one, had come off the rail he had been leaning on and was standing straight up, and he was not looking at the lane anymore. He was looking at me. I felt it before I understood it. The particular pressure of being looked at by someone who is not sizing you up but placing you, fitting your face against a face they already have. It is a different thing from the way Kessler had looked at me. Kessler had looked at me and seen nothing and filled the nothing with contempt. This was the opposite. This was a man looking at me and seeing something and going pale with the size of it. I did not let myself look back at him too long. I have a rule about that, built over years, that you do not go looking for your own past in the faces of strangers, because the past is patient, and it will find you on its own schedule, and you only hurt yourself running ahead to meet it. Because here is the thing about the 13 years between the ridge and the lane. I did not spend them talking about the ridge. I spent them becoming a person who could carry the weight of it quietly, which turned out to be its own long crossing of open ground. I left the enlisted ranks 2 years after Afghanistan and went to officer candidate school. And I did it partly because a Gold Star mother, Trell's mother, took my hands at a memorial and told me that the best thing I could do with the fact that I had lived was to become the kind of leader who would spend her whole career making sure fewer mothers ended up where she was standing. I have tried to be that. It is the only promise I have ever made to a dead man's mother, and I have organized a decade and a half of my life around keeping it. But keeping it meant learning to hold the ridge without letting it show. A commander who visibly carries a wound like that makes her people nervous, and nervous people make mistakes, and I was not going to let my grief become someone else's hazard. So I learned to keep my face flat, and my hands still, and my voice level, and I learned it so well that most of the people who have worked for me over the years have no idea the ridge exists. They think I am simply calm. They do not know that the calm is a structure I built brick by brick over a thing that would otherwise not let me sleep. They do not know that every time I have made a hard call with lives on it, some part of me is back at the last cover with Trell, checking my arithmetic one more time, making sure I'm not about to leave someone I could have carried. That is who was standing at the back of Corporal Kessler's line. Not a lost dependent, not a wandering civilian. A woman who had spent 13 years turning the worst afternoon of her life into the reason she was good at keeping other people alive, and who had come to a ruck lane in a gray shirt to see whether the group she was about to lead knew how to hold on to its quiet ones. He could not have known, but that is what he kicked into the gravel. The ridge again, because this is where the two of them started climbing toward the same minute. When the wash opened up, Pruitt went down in the first 30 seconds. I did not see him get hit. I heard it called, heard the flat, awful word of it in my ear, and then I saw him, out past the last cover, face down in the open with one leg not working and the whole far slope trying to finish the job. The exfil was 600 meters back the way we had come, across a stretch of ground with nothing on it taller than a stone. Between Pruitt and that exfil, there was the wash, and the fire coming out of it, and a distance that the human mind looking at it simply refuses. 600 meters is not far when you are walking to your car. It is the other side of the world when it is open and a man is bleeding on the far edge of it, and the air over it is full of things moving very fast. The troop was pinned. Everyone who could put fire on the wash was putting fire on the wash, and it was not enough to move, only enough to not die where we lay, and in that math, Pruitt was on the wrong side of a line that no one could cross. I looked at the ground between us. I want to tell you, I made a brave decision, that there was a moment of courage I could point to and say, there, that is where I chose. There was not. There was just the ground, and Pruitt on it, and the complete and total impossibility of leaving a man on the ground. It was not courage. Courage implies a choice, and I did not experience it as a choice. I experienced it as the only shape the next few seconds could possibly take. I went across the open ground. I have been asked, in the careful way people ask, what it is like. What it is actually like to run into open ground that everyone with sense is staying out of. And the honest answer disappoints them, because they want it to be loud, and it is quiet. The world narrows down to a tunnel. The noise, which is enormous, goes somewhere else, filed away to be dealt with later by a version of me that is not busy. What is left is very small and very simple. The next piece of ground, the next piece after that. Pruitt's shape getting bigger. The count I started keeping out loud without deciding to. 1, 2, 3, 4, the numbers landing on my footfalls. A rope I threw to myself across the distance. I reached him. He was conscious, which was worse, because conscious meant he could argue. Go back, he said. You can't carry me. Go back. He was probably 190 pounds before you added the kit, and I was 130 pounds with my boots on, and by the pure physics of it, he was right. I could not carry him. There is a kind of arithmetic that says a small person cannot lift a large one over that distance under that load, and the arithmetic is correct, and I have never once in my life let it be the last word. I got him up. I will not pretend it was graceful. I got a shoulder into him, and my legs under both of us, and I stood, and the count in my head became the only thing holding me upright. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I started back across the 600 meters with a grown man on my back and the far slope trying to take us both. There's a thing that happens to your body when it decides the count matters more than the pain. It gives you the next step, not the whole distance. It will never give you the whole distance, but it will give you the next step if you ask it right, if you keep the number steady and do not look up at how far is left. I did not look up. I looked at my boots, and I kept the number, and I gave Pruitt the small mercy of not letting him feel me struggle, because a wounded man on your back feels everything, and the last thing I wanted him carrying out of that day was the sound of me failing. I made the exfil. I set him down. I set him down carefully all the way down, and I stood up straight, and then I turned around and looked back across the 600 meters at Mabry, who was pinned at the last cover with Trell, and I went back. On the lane, in the cold, the big Navy man started walking toward me. He came off the fence line and he crossed the churned dust of the course, and Kessler, who did not understand what was happening, but could feel that something was, tried to get in front of it, tried to keep his lane. It is what you do at 22 when the ground shifts under you and you cannot see why. You get louder. You reach for the thing that worked a minute ago. Hey, we're running a relay here, Kessler said. What are you, lost? You got friends now? He turned to me, and the crowd was still his crowd, barely, and he made the mistake of reaching for it one more time. Pick up the pace or get off my lane, sweetheart. I almost felt for him. I have been 22 and certain and wrong. I have stood in front of a room talking louder because the floor had tilted, and I did not have the years yet to know that the thing to do when the floor tilts is to go quiet and find out why. He was talking louder, and the big Navy man walked past him as if he were a fence post, not unkindly, just completely, the way you walk past a thing that is not relevant to where you are going. He stopped in front of me. Up close I could see him now, could fit my own face against a face I had, could feel the 13 years fold shut like a hand. It was Pruitt. He was 41 now, a senior chief, gray coming in at the temples, a life written across him in the way a life writes itself across men who stay in that work. But it was him. It was the easy center of gravity, older, and the eyes were the same eyes that had looked up at me from the open ground and told me to go back. He did not salute me. He did not know yet, in that first second, whether I was an officer, and it would not have been the first thing in him anyway. The first thing in him was older than rank. "Tell me that's not you," he said. His voice was not steady. This was a man whose voice, I would bet, had not been unsteady in front of other people in 20 years. "Tell me I'm wrong. Marsh. Sergeant Marsh." Behind him, Mabry had come off the fence too, and was standing now, and I watched him arrive at the same place Pruitt had arrived at a few seconds behind, and go the same shade of pale. The lane had gone quiet, not the quiet of a crowd waiting to laugh, the other quiet, the one that comes into a place when everyone in it realizes at the same moment that they have wandered into something real, something with weight, and that they are going to have to be still for it. I looked at Pruitt, and I did the thing I had decided to do in the cold a few minutes before. I let the truth arrive on its own feet. "Hello, Gabe," I said. "I need to take you back to the ridge one more time, because you cannot stand on that lane with me and understand what those two men were doing on their feet unless you have been back across the 600 meters the second time. I went back for Mabry through the same fire. There is nothing brave to report about it either. The second crossing is worse than the first, because the first one you do in a kind of holy ignorance, and the second one you do knowing exactly what the ground is, having just been across it, having felt precisely how close the far slope came to ending you. The second crossing you do with knowledge, and knowledge is the enemy of the kind of thing I was doing. I kept the count anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4. I reached the last cover. People ask me sometimes, the ones who know a little of it, how a person makes herself do that. Cross the open ground a second time, knowing exactly what it is. Pick up the weight the arithmetic says will crush her. And I have never had a good answer, because the honest one is boring, and it is this. You decide the thing beforehand, long beforehand, on an ordinary day when nothing is happening, and then when the terrible day comes, you are not deciding anymore. You're only doing what you already decided. I decided, somewhere in my first year in uniform, that I was not going to be a person who left people on the ground. I decided it before I had ever seen the ground. And so, on the ridge, there was no courage to summon, because the summoning had happened years earlier, quietly, with no one watching. That is the part they do not tell you about the people you call brave. Most of us are not brave in the moment. We are honoring a promise we made to ourselves back when it was cheap to make. The moment is not where courage lives. Courage lives in the ordinary decision, made early, to be a certain kind of person, so that when the ground opens up, you do not have to go looking for your character. You only have to keep it. I had kept mine on a ridge. I intended to keep it on a lane. Mabry was working on Trell. Trell had been hit bad, in the first minute, the same burst that took Pruitt down, and Mabry had dragged him into the shadow of the only rock on that whole slope, and was doing everything a very good man can do with his hands, which on that day was not going to be enough. I knew it was not going to be enough the moment I saw it. You learn to read that? It is a terrible thing to be able to read, and I would give a great deal to unlearn it. "Take him," Mabry said, meaning Trell. "Take him, I can move on my own." He could not. His leg was wrong. He was saying he could move because he was the kind of man who says he can move, and I have loved 100 people for that exact lie, and it has never once been true. I made a decision I have carried every day since. I could take one man across the 600 meters at a time, not two. The arithmetic that let me carry one was already a lie I was telling my body, and there was no version of it that carried two. So I had to choose, and the choosing has never left me, and I am not going to dress it up for you now. Trell was dying. Mabry was not. If I took Trell first, Trell would very likely die on my back halfway across the open. And Mabry, waiting alone at the last cover with a leg that would not move, would very likely be overrun before I could come back a third time. If I took Mabry first, Trell would die at the last cover, alone except for the shadow of the rock. I knelt down next to Trell. He was still there, behind his eyes, just barely. He knew me. "Sergeant," he said, like it was a whole name. "I've got you," I told him. It was the necessary lie, the only one worth telling, and I have never regretted it. "I've got you. You go where the mission goes, remember? The mission's going home. You're going home." He tried to grin. He did not have it in him anymore, but he tried, and the trying is the thing I kept, the way I kept the grin on the climb. Then I picked up Mabry, because Mabry could be saved, and I carried him across the 600 meters while Trell died, at the last cover in the shadow of a rock, and that is the true shape of the day, and I have never told it any other way, because there is no other way to tell it that is not a kindness to me at the cost of the truth, and Trell is owed the truth. I set Mabry down at the exfil, I set him down carefully, all the way down, and I stood up straight. And then, for the first time all day, I did not have another man to go back for, because the only one left could not be carried, only recovered, and we recovered him that night, and I was there for that too. We went back for Trell that night. That is a thing people who have not done this work do not always understand, that you go back, that we do not leave our dead, that there is an entire machinery of will and risk and helicopters devoted to the simple refusal to leave a body on a hillside. We went back for him in the dark, and I went with them, because there was no version of that night where I was going to let someone else be the last hands on Micah Trell. Pruitt could not go. He was on a table by then, with people working to save the leg. Mabry could not go, same. So I went with the others, up the same ridge in the dark, to the last cover, to the shadow of the rock. He was where I had left him. I had known he would be, and knowing did not help. We brought him down off the ridge with more care than we had brought anything up it, and I carried a corner of the litter the whole way, which was not necessary. There were plenty of hands, but I needed my hands on him for that last trip the way I had not been able to keep them on him for the one that mattered. That is not logic. Grief is not logic. Grief is a set of small physical debts you pay to the dead, because the large debt cannot be paid at all. The months after, in the hospital and then back home, I learned what Pruitt and Mabry were going to be to me for the rest of my life. Not friends exactly. The word is too small and too casual. We were the survivors of a specific afternoon, bound by a thing that has no name in ordinary language, 3 people who between us held the whole truth of what happened on Ridge 6 and could not fully share it with anyone who had not been there. Pruitt kept the leg, mostly. Mabry's leg healed clean. They both stayed in, and rose, and built lives, and named their children after each other, and never once, in 13 years, said the third name out loud, because saying it out loud felt like losing him a second time, and they could not afford to lose him twice. Some months after I was back on my feet, they gave me a medal, a silver star, for carrying 2 men across 600 meters of open ground under fire. There was a ceremony. I attended it the way you attend your own root canal, because the machinery of the army needs these ceremonies, and it would have been a discourtesy to the machinery to refuse, but everything in me wanted to be anywhere else. They read a citation. It described what I did with the flat, heroic language those citations use, and every word of it was accurate, and all of it was a lie by omission, because not one line of it mentioned Micah Trell, the man I did not carry, the choice that was the actual center of that whole afternoon. You cannot put a decoration on the man you left. There is no ribbon for it. There is only, as I have said, the rest of your life, and I have been paying it out in a currency of other people's safety ever since. Trell's mother was at the ceremony. She found me afterward, and she took my hands, and she did not thank me for the medal, which she understood better than the people who pinned it on me. She thanked me for going back for him that night, and then she said the thing about becoming the kind of leader who keeps other mothers off that particular patch of ground, and she handed me the rest of my life with those 2 sentences. And I took it, and I have carried it. And I was still carrying it on a gray morning, 13 years later, when a Marine corporal decided I could not even lift a ruck. They do not give medals for the one you choose to leave. That is correct. There should be no medal for that. There should only be the rest of your life, and I have been spending mine on purpose. On the lane, Pruitt heard me say his name, and something in his face came apart, and then put itself back together into something steadier and much older than the man who had walked over. He turned, not to me, to the lane, to the 30 troops standing in the cold, to the crowd that had laughed a few minutes before, and most of all, though he did not point, to the corporal standing frozen at the edge of it with the memory of his own boot against my pack still fresh on him. "This is Sergeant Marsh," Pruitt said, and his voice had found its bottom, and it carried now, flat and certain, the voice of a man reading something off a wall. 13 years ago, she carried me off a ridge, 600 meters under fire, on her back, one leg of mine not working and the other not much better. And when she set me down, she turned around and went back across the same 600 meters and carried Chief Mabry, who is standing right there, off the same ridge. Nobody moved. The wind moved. Nothing else. I outweighed her by 60 pounds before you count the kit, Pruitt said. The math says she couldn't do it. She did it twice. Mabry stepped up beside him. He was not a man who spoke much, I would learn, the same quiet man at 40 that he had been at 27. And when he spoke, it was not to the lane. It was to me. "You came back for me," he said. "I told you to leave me and take Trell, and you did the harder thing, and you came back for the one you could save. I have spent 13 years not knowing how to thank a person for a decision like that." He stopped. "I'm still not going to manage it, but I stand up when you walk into a room. I've done it for 13 years. I'm going to keep doing it. I want to tell you, I received all of this with grace. I did not. I received it the way you receive a wave that is bigger than you expected, planting your feet and letting it go over you, and hoping to still be standing when it passes. These are things I have not let myself hear said out loud, because saying them out loud makes them real in a way that living them does not, and the realness has an edge on it. But I have learned something about moments like that one, something it took me too long to learn. They are not, in the end, about me. Pruitt was not standing on that lane, naming the ridge to honor me. He was doing it because there was a young corporal at the edge of the crowd who had just learned, in the worst possible way, that he had judged the size of a person's worth by the size of their body. And Pruitt was a senior chief, and it is a senior chief's whole job to make sure a lesson like that lands all the way down. So I let him. I did not wave it off. I stood in it, and I let the lane hear it. And when Pruitt was done, I said the only thing about that day I have ever really been able to say. "There were 3 of us who needed carrying off that ridge," I said. My voice was steady. I have had a lot of practice keeping it steady. I carried 2. The third was Petty Officer Micah Trell. He was 21. He died at the last cover while I carried Chief Mabry out, and I made that choice with my own hands. And I would make it again, and it has cost me every day since. I looked at the corporal then, for the first time since he had kicked my pack. I'm not telling you that to make you feel small. I'm telling you because his name should live somewhere other than the inside of my head. Say it once, so it's been said here. There was a silence. And then quietly, all down the lane, in the ragged way a group says a thing it was not ordered to say, they said it. Trell. Somebody near the back, maybe Nolan, said it first, and then it went through them like water finding its level. Trell, Trell. And the corporal's mouth moved, and I saw him say it too. Master Sergeant Delmore chose that moment, exactly that moment, to walk over to Kessler. He had the timing of a man who has spent 20 years knowing precisely when to step into a thing. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The whole lane was silent and hanging on it. "Corporal Kessler," Delmore said, "the pack you kicked into the gravel belongs to Major Delia Marsh. As of Monday, she's the operations officer of this entire group. Your incoming boss. You want to remember how this morning went because she's going to be signing your evaluations for the next 2 years. I watched it hit him. Oh, I have watched a lot of things hit a lot of people, and there is a range to it, from the ones who crumble to the ones who go defensive to the ones who simply stop being able to look at you. Kessler did the thing that is rarest, and that told me the most about him. He did not crumble and he did not defend. He looked at me straight on and went the color of a man who has understood the exact size of his mistake and is not going to look away from it. "Ma'am," he said. That was all he could get out right then. Just the word. But he held my eyes while he said it, and there is more character in that than in a paragraph of apology. The relay ended. The morning wound down the way mornings do, the enormous thing that had happened folding back into the small logistics of a training course, packs coming off, water going around, cadre calling the next serial. I have always found that part strange, how the world insists on continuing to be ordinary right after it has been anything but. Kessler came to me when the lane had cleared. No audience. He walked up the way a man walks up to a thing he would rather not walk up to but is going to do anyway, and he stood in front of me, and he did not reach for a single excuse. "Ma'am, there's nothing I can say that fixes it," he said. "I looked at you, and I saw somebody small, and I decided that meant something, and I did it loud, in front of my whole lane, and I put my boot on your pack to make it worse. I don't have a reason. I just had a picture in my head of what somebody who belongs here looks like, and you weren't it, and I was wrong about every part of that. I had waited a long time, in a general way, for men to say a thing like that to the small people they had gotten wrong. It is different when the one saying it is 22 and means every word and is not saying it because he got caught, but because he actually understands now. That is the whole game, right there. Not whether they get it wrong. Everyone gets it wrong, whether they understand it when it is shown to them. I could have relieved him? Some of you are thinking I should have. There is a version of this story that ends with Corporal Kessler off the cadre and a letter in his file, and it would have been just. And it would have been small. I have found that the smallest thing you can do with power is use it to make someone as small as they made you feel. It scratches an itch, and it changes nothing. The larger thing, the harder thing, is to take the person who got it wrong and give them something to carry that makes them the reason it does not happen to the next person. You're not getting relieved, I told him. His face did something complicated. You're going to keep running this lane, every cycle, and here's what you're going to do differently. Before the first relay, every cycle, you are going to read one name out loud to the whole line. Trell. Micah, Trell. And you're going to tell them, in your own words, why the smallest person in the line might be the one who comes back for them across 600 meters when the math says it can't be done. You judged a person by their size once, out loud, in front of everybody. So you're going to unjudge one out loud in front of everybody, every cycle, for as long as you run this course. That's the deal. That's the whole correction. Can you carry it? He was quiet for a second. Then he took a pen out of his cargo pocket and he wrote the name on the back of his hand. Trell. In block letters, and he looked at it, and he did not wipe it off. Yes, ma'am, he said. I can carry it. Later, when the course was empty, and the light had gone gray and flat, I stood at the wire with Pruitt and Mabry, 3 people who had been on Ridge 6, standing on a quiet training lane 13 years and half a world away, not saying most of what there was to say, because most of it does not have words, and the 3 of us had long ago stopped trying to force it into them. We name our kids after each other, Pruitt said, looking out at the empty lane. You know that. My boy's middle name is Sean. Sean's daughter's middle name is Gabriella. He was quiet a moment. We never say the other name. 13 years. Not once out loud. We carry him, but we carry him silent because saying it out loud is like losing him again. I know, I said, because I did. You just made a Marine corporal say it, Pruitt said. You're going to make him say it every cycle for the rest of his career. Every batch of kids that comes through this course is going to hear Trell's name from a Marine who never met him. He shook his head slowly. I've spent 13 years keeping him quiet to keep him. You just did the opposite thing, and I think you might be right. That was the point, I said. The name shouldn't live only in us. We're going to die someday, the 3 of us. And if he only lives in us, then he dies when we do. Put him in a corporal. Put him in a course. Put him in every kid who rucks that lane, and here's why. That's how he outlives us. That's the only way anybody outlives us. Mabry, who had said his one thing an hour already, said his second. He'd have liked you saying his name to a bunch of new privates, he said. He was a new private about 10 minutes before he wasn't. He'd have liked that a lot. We stood at the wire and worked out, without ever quite saying we were working it out, what we were going to do. Pruitt would talk to his command about a small placard for the course, brushed steel, nothing grand, with Trell's name on it and one line about the standard it stood for. Delmore would find a wall to bolt it to, and every cycle, before the first relay, a Marine corporal named Kessler would read the name and tell a new line of tired troops why the smallest person among them might be the one who came back. The 3 of us built a little machine that morning at the wire, a machine for keeping a dead man alive in the mouths of strangers, and building it together was the closest thing to comfort any of us had felt about the Ridge in 13 years. You know what the worst part was, Pruitt said, not as a question. For me, it wasn't the leg. It was that for years I told the story of that day and left you out of it. Not on purpose. I'd say we got ambushed and we got extracted and we lost Trell. And the getting extracted part just sat there like it happened by itself, like the 600 meters walked me home. He looked at me. I let people think I saved myself. I never once said, a sergeant named Marsh put me on her back and carried me. I don't know why. I think it was easier to have survived than to have been carried. It's the same thing, I said. Surviving and being carried. Nobody survives that kind of day by themselves. You just don't always get to see the person who carried you. I'm going to start saying your name in the story, Pruitt said. 13 years late, I'm going to start saying it. Say Trell's first, I said. Mine can come after. His comes first, always. Pruitt nodded, and Mabry nodded, and that was the whole agreement. 3 people, an offense, and a dead man's name, finally allowed out into the air. We stood there a while longer. There is a cost to this, and I am not going to pretend there is not, because I told you I would give you the true shape of it. The recognition on that lane was real and it was good, and I will not diminish it. But it reopened the Ridge, the way it always reopens, and the Ridge always costs the same man. and being seen correctly by Corporal Kessler and 30 strangers does not bring Mike Trell up off the last cover. Being right about that day and being whole after it were never the same thing, and I made my peace a long time ago with the distance between them. That peace is not the absence of the cost. It is the decision to carry the cost without letting it carry you. 2 days later, I took the group. I walked into a conference room full of people who had, most of them, heard some version of the Ruck Lane by then, because stories move through a formation faster than any order ever will. I did not mention it. I stood up and I talked about fuel and boundaries and the 100 unglamorous things that keep 600 people alive, and I let the Ruck Lane be a thing they knew rather than a thing I said. I watched them while I talked. That is most of what leading is, watching, and I have gotten good at it. I could see who had already decided about me and who was still deciding. I could see Kessler in the second row, sitting straight, the name still faintly visible in ink on the back of his hand where he had written it again that morning, so it would not wash off. I could see a few of the ones who had laughed on the lane, careful now, not because they were afraid of me, but because they had learned something about the cost of laughing at the wrong, quiet person, and I hoped the lesson would generalize, that they would carry it past me to the next stranger they were tempted to measure by size. Here is what I know about leading a group like that. You do not get their trust by being the most impressive person in the room. Impressive fades. You get it by being the person who, when the ground opens up, they believe will come across the open for them. And you cannot say that about yourself. You cannot stand up in a conference room and announce that you are the kind of leader who comes back. It has to be a thing they conclude on their own from evidence, and the evidence is always small and always accumulates slowly. A picked-up pack here, a steadied private there, a dead man's name given a home. I had 2 years to build that evidence with these 600 people before we went somewhere. It would be tested. The Ruck Lane, as it turned out, was the first brick, and I had a corporal to thank for handing it to me, though I never did and never will, because he does not need my thanks. He needs to run his lane and read his name and become the leader the morning made possible. That is the strange gift buried in the worst thing that happened on that lane. Kessler's cruelty gave me a group that watched their new commander pick a pack up out of the gravel and never once reach for her rank to defend herself. You could not buy that introduction. You could not plan it. He handed it to me with his boot, and I have built 2 good years on it, and he will never know that the morning he was most ashamed of was the morning he did me the largest favor of my command. But before all that, on the morning it happened, after Kessler wrote the name on his hand, I did one more thing. I finished the lane. I put the pack back on, the same pack he had kicked into the gravel, and I ran the ruck course to standard, full load, in front of whoever was still there to watch. I want to be honest about why, because it would be a better story if I did it to prove the corporal wrong, and that is not why I did it. I did not run it for Kessler. Kessler was already corrected. I ran it for the private at the back of the line. I ran it for Nolan, who was small like me and gassed and standing at the edge where a person decides which kind they are and who needed, more than she needed any words from me, to watch a woman built like her put a full ruck on her back and cover the distance to standard. Words are cheap, and I had already spent some on her. The lane was the thing she needed to see. She watched me finish, and then she got back in line, and she finished too. Well after me, at her own pace, long after most of the crowd had wandered off. And Kessler, to his credit, was the one who walked the last stretch beside her, not carrying her pack. Never that, just being there at her shoulder, saying the small, true things that get a person across the last 100 meters. I watched him do it. He was good at it. Delmore had told me he would be, and Delmore had been right. 2 rucks, set down at the same line, 13 years, and 1 lane apart. Both times I set the weight down carefully, all the way down. And both times I stood up straight afterward, because that is the part that matters, the standing up straight. And it is the only part I have ever really had any control over. I want to say one thing to you, whoever you are, before I go. If you have ever been looked at and measured and dismissed before you opened your mouth, judged by your size or your voice or your face or the plain, gray, unremarkable surface of you, then you already know the thing it took me a ridge to learn, and you did not need a corporal or a pack in the gravel to learn it. You know that the people who decide what you are in the first half second are almost always wrong, and that their being wrong is not your emergency to fix. You do not owe anyone the story of what you have carried. You do not have to reach for your last name, your record, your proof, the moment someone gets you wrong. Let them be wrong. Carry what you carry anyway. The people who need to know will find out, and they will find out in a way that lands, and the ones who mocked you will remember the exact morning they learned the truth for the rest of their lives. That is a better justice than any speech you could have given. And if you are ever the one at the front of the line, loud and certain and sure you can read a person by their size, I hope somebody stops you gently before the ground has to. But if the ground stops you, take the name they give you to carry it and become the reason it does not happen to the next quiet person at the back of the line. Be the one who goes back. It is the whole of it. It is the only part of any of this that has ever mattered. Be the one who crosses the open ground for the person the math says you cannot reach. I have carried heavier things than a ruck, so have you. Stand up straight anyway. That's the whole of it.